Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Schools across Idaho are laying off staff, cutting teacher pay, downsizing the school calendar, and finding every way possible to meet this year's budget crisis. We're looking at the cost of school budget cuts and the impact on your kids, and we're taking your questions. Stay tuned. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. To balance the state's budget, Idaho legislators cut the public school appropriation by 7.5%. That means $128.5 million less will be going to Idaho's classrooms. At the time, educators said this was going to be bad, but we didn't know exactly how bad it would be. Well, now we know a bit more. Dialogue associate producer Melanie Corey and I surveyed Idaho's 115 school districts. Not every school district responded, but those who did, next school year will look pretty bleak. Here are a few highlights from our survey. Teachers, administrators, and school staff in the Twin Falls district will have the most furlough days next school year at 14. Employees in the Wendell district will face 13 furlough days. At least 5 school districts will go to, or will have already gone to, a 4-day school week. 6 districts have added time to the school day to shorten their entire school year. And the state has eliminated funding for all field trips, so most districts reported that they will be entirely dependent upon PTOs and other community fundraisers to pay for these activities. 6 school districts have cut or eliminated junior high school athletic programs. And the Melba district eliminated almost all of their music programs. So what do these cuts mean to Idaho's kids? How did districts decide what programs to put on the chopping block? And what will be the short and long-term impacts? Joining me to try and answer these questions are 4 guests. In our Pocatello studio is Jeffrey Thomas, Superintendent of the Madison County School District. Thank you, sir, for being there. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
In our Moscow studio is Mark Moore, Potlatch District School Board member. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for letting me be here.
And joining me here in Boise is Linda Clark, Superintendent of the Meridian School District. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
And Sherry Wood, President of the Idaho Education Association. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And of course, we want to hear from you. Be a part of the conversation. Give us a call, toll free at 1-800-973-9800. So why don't we go ahead and start the table? Frankly, when we talked to 115 different school districts from folks all over the state, many of them were almost in tears over how things are. What scares you most about all the cuts that are coming down the pike?
Oh, I think I'm most frightened by the long-term implications of this in terms of teacher recruitment, in terms of keeping the qualified teachers we have who are going to struggle making ends meet, and also the long-term implications of having to put very progressive kinds of things on hold for lack of funding.
Jeff, how about in your side of the state?
Well, I'd like to echo what Linda said there, and her remarks are very accurate. But in addition to that, what we're seeing is a shift from support at the state level to focusing that support at the local level. Yep. And then we have economic disparities throughout the state, and there are going to be districts that have and districts that have not. And ultimately, the long-term impact will be on our children.
Mark, how about you?
Well, I think what scares me the most, besides the comments that were made by Jeff and Linda, was the animosity that occurred, the acrimony within the negotiating process that we saw this year. It was at a heightened level. We're all trying to provide resources and benefits to our teachers, and whether rightly or wrongly, there was a feeling that the boards were being adverse to the teachers unduly. And I think that was very unfortunate and something that we need to correct.
And Sherry?
Well, I guess I agree with most of the comments that have already been made. My biggest fear is the quality of education that we're going to be able to deliver to our children. You know, just because budget cuts were made, that doesn't mean that our children are going to not come to schools. They're going to still come at even a larger rate, probably in a lot of places. And it's still, the accountability is still left at the feet of the teacher who delivers instruction to those young people, and they'll get to do it on less next year as they did it on less this year. And so I fear that a whole lot of quality instruction. Not quality instruction, but how we maintain for our kids and how well they'll be educated over time.
In looking at the number where the cuts came, one person suggested that the state legislature balanced the back of our funding on the backs of teachers, that it was the teachers that took the hit.
Every public educator in the state took the hit. It's absolutely true.
And I think the point needs to be made. You know, we talk a lot about the 7.5% cut. The reality is for this year, the legislature cut funding 4%. And next year, the accurate figures is much greater than 7.5. It's 9.8% when you add discretionary monies and other funding in there. So over a 2-year period, it's about a 14% cut. And that's been incredibly challenging to deal with.
There was a lot of discussion about the inequity of funding for public schools in Idaho, and we could probably do a whole show on that, but to give people a little bit of background if they haven't been in Idaho for a long time, there was a three-legged stool apparently, you know, in place for funding Idaho between income tax and property tax and sales tax. And then when Senator Risch was then Governor Risch, there was a change where a lot of the property tax was shifted for schools, was shifted to essentially the general fund that has to do more with income and sales, and that leg kind of came off, that three-legged stool. Do you think the funding for public schools in Idaho is out of balance? Why don't we start up with you, Mark, as a school board member? Do you see that?
Where we get our revenue is, you know, it's a difficult question. You have individuals. We as trustees are obligated to provide quality education. We get our primary source of funding from the legislature. We certainly get revenue at the local level. It doesn't really matter which source you go to, as long as the source can be maintained and we don't have these economic swings. I mean, all of us have faced the impact of an economic downturn this last year. And so whether we saw that a hit in income tax or in sales tax or even in devaluation of property because of lower house sales, there would have been a reduction this year regardless of the source. Trying to find a means to rebalance the scale is going to be what we need to strive for the future. We need to be looking at solutions, not necessarily looking at the past and where the problem arose from.
I think the big challenge was in cutting off the property tax leg of the stool, we removed the most stable form of funding for schools. We made schools totally dependent on the vagaries of the economic situation. The conversion or the transfer that was discussed to sales tax with the advent of 1 additional cent meant that we started $50 million in the hole every year when times were good, because 1 cent didn't make up all of the money that the property tax had been doing. Now, depending on who you talk to, that $50 million shortfall is $150 million or $180 million in this down economy. So we have no stability in our funding at all.
And Joan, I think the real concern here is, you know, in a one-day session, over 100 years of this three-legged stool was overturned in one day. And I always believe that hurried legislation typically is poor legislation because you don't have the time to reflect on what the ramifications will be. And that was concerning to me, and at that time I expressed the concern that many had. I said, well, what happens if we go to sales tax? What happens when the economy goes down? In 2006, the economy was booming. And I was assured time and again that public education would be protected. And that has not been the case. And so I think some form of revision back to that more stable form of tax would be a very wise move by the legislature.
Let me throw out the question that actually you, sir, brought up earlier in the show, that this might end up putting us back into a case where we have have not districts. Are we going to see a lawsuit coming out of this? Under Idaho's Constitution, we're supposed to have fair, equitable, free education, and as fees are increased, as things get cut, are we going to end up back in court?
Well, I think the concern, the legislature passed a law a few years ago when the school districts sued them over lack of funding for facilities. So we, as a district, we can't sue the legislature anymore. However, if a lawsuit were to occur, it'd have to be a class action lawsuit brought forth by a patron or concerned parent or so on and so forth. My concern is inequity. The Idaho Constitution is clear in its mandate that all children through Idaho will receive a general, uniform education, will be provided for by the state legislature. What I'm seeing now is, district have and have not districts, communities that can pass a supplemental levy will, districts that cannot won't, and there will be economic, educational disparities in a system that should be thorough and fair for all Idaho children.
It really wouldn't be an overstatement to say that all of the measures that the legislature put in place as a result of the original lawsuit, not the facilities one that was mentioned, but the original funding lawsuit, have been undone, and that those disparities, and maybe even greater ones, exist or at least loom in the future. What we saw this year was the unwillingness of a legislature to raise taxes or, excuse me, to make any kind of adjustment in sales tax exemptions, and said essentially to the patrons, if you want to fund schools at an appropriate level, you tax yourselves, because even though it is our constitutional responsibility to do so, we are not.
Let's get
but we also have a
Sure, go ahead.
We also have a mechanism in place wherein each student receives the same dollar around the state from the state in terms of state funding. So that is certainly in place, but at the same time we have to balance that against the desire of a local community to have self-direction, self-control, and to offer programs locally that are more pertinent to that community. And I think it would be difficult to offer the same programs in Boise as are offered in Bonners Ferry, just because of the various resources, not just economic resources, but also the people resources who are there.
Well, as the largest district in the state, I have to respectfully disagree that we all get the same dollar. With the $4,300 per student that we're getting next year, we're significantly at the bottom of the per pupil expenditures and per pupil revenue that's coming. And there's a great disparity amongst the districts in terms of actual dollars they get. We have some economy of scale, but that only goes so far, and we're well past that.
We've got some phone callers we want to get to. Glenn in Chalice. Glenn?
Hi, Joan.
Hi.
Thanks for taking my call.
Mm-hmm.
And this question is for your guest. Since the cuts are going to be made, what's going to happen to the music industry for schools, and what's going to happen for the bands for sports?
Okay. That's, we can kind of talk about all the other things that should have been done and would have been done, but the reality is those programs are going to go. What's going to happen to those kids who no longer can participate in sports because the programs just aren't there anymore?
Well, I think you saw that in your, or you reported earlier that some districts are cutting music and extracurricular activities, at least in the junior high, and I believe in the Twin Falls area there's a discussion about cutting athletics totally by 10%. I believe that was discussed with the superintendents.
The Clark district is eliminating them all entirely?
That's correct. And I'm assuming then it's going to fall on the parents that can and that have ability to pay to take their children to community centers and things like that, because they won't be offered at our public schools in some places.
Go ahead.
But I think we also need to recognize that the school is probably the central location for most small rural communities in their town. For example, in Potlatch, our school is used for everything from the concerts to the artistic programs that are offered to the Halloween events, and so they're going to be, the schools are going to be available to offer what they can. It's just a matter of it may have to be funded through the local community, whether they're funded through pay-to-play programs or funded through booster programs or whatever other means. We're going to have to do that. And that's just part of, I think, tightening the belt that we have to do.
Let's go to Felicia. Felicia, go ahead.
Hi, Joan. This is my question. Superintendent Luna found other sources of revenue at the Land Board. I'm wondering, have any of you been able to think outside the box and come up with maybe some other sources of revenue we haven't tapped yet or could look into without raising taxes?
Okay.
Well, our district has looked very hard at revenue, and we have been fortunate. We have a new facility. We purchased an old warehouse building and converted it, and we are leasing space. We've looked at all the leases we have, rentals, and throughout our district, and we've significantly increased that revenue stream. And we're looking actively for others. We're engaged in looking at projects for solar and other sorts of ways, because we recognize, as the point the caller made, that we need to look at the revenue side. And are there other avenues for schools to generate funds? I don't believe we can keep going to our parents and keep going to our communities. We go to them a lot anyway. And then we ask them to step up and pass bonds, and we ask them to step up and pass supplemental levies, and we ask them to step up and pass plant facility levies. You know, at some point that we can't just keep going there. So yes, absolutely, we're stepping way out of the box to look at those other things.
And Joan, as far as, you know, aside from property tax and income tax, I've proposed legislation to raise a fee on pop, bottled water, and energy drinks in the state of Idaho. It's a user fee. A person doesn't have to have these things. And my contention is if you pay 79 cents at a convenience store for your 44-ounce, you'll pay 89 cents. And that money has been estimated to generate an additional $15 million for the state of Idaho. And that's a significant amount of money without incurring a lot of pain that the traditional taxes cause patrons.
We had an email question from Julie who wanted to know how the state's long-term neglect of education could affect the state's ability to retain and attract businesses.
Well, I believe it will have a definite effect. I think there was an article in the Statesman just a week ago where high-tech industries were saying we're not going to come here because it's very clear that our policymakers are not putting an emphasis on our public schools. And it doesn't take long to read any paper in the state and see in yet another article of how we're not funding our schools. And they can see it over and over and over again that this is Mr. Luna and our legislature, first time ever in the state of Idaho have we cut public schools. So I think it's going to have a huge effect on enticing businesses to come here.
I think there's a huge disconnect for policymakers who talk a lot about economic development being their #1 priority and who haven't been able to connect the dots in terms of the importance of education. And if one were to talk to any of the economic development officers for the cities, you would get a list from them of companies that get up to making the decision and say, we really would love to come to Idaho for all these reasons, but we're afraid to come because of the state's lack of commitment to education.
Mark, I heard you sighing up in Moscow.
Well, I was thinking of the article that Sherry was speaking of, and I thought that particular article was directed more towards higher education, not the K-12 education that we predominantly deal with. It is a concern. Certainly our students have to have the fundamentals that we provide them in the schools, but I think if you look at our ISAT scores and other scores, Idaho schools are doing a good job. I think our teachers are doing a very good job in providing those fundamentals to our students. I don't think that is just the only factor in the equation. It is an important factor, but it certainly is not the only factor.
Let me ask this to all four of you. Do you think parents are ready for this when school gets back going in September? Assuming you're not in summer school, I guess. and you all of a sudden have all the changes coming forth. Are parents ready?
Well, I think that the 88% yes vote in our election this week, with the largest turnout we've had in a very long time, is a strong indicator that our parents are very concerned about the lack of resources and willing to give the districts the kinds of tools that they need. This was not a tax question, it was a question of shifting money, but still very strong turnout, very strong support. Clearly they recognize there's a problem and we have to have lots of tools to address them.
Jeffrey in Madison
And
County.
Joan,
go ahead.
Yeah, so we've done a number of, we've had public meetings, we've put things on our website. We've tried to be as clear as we can with parents exactly what the changes that are coming. We have an informed group of parents in Madison County, both for the Salem School District and the Madison School District, that are well informed. They read newspapers, they watch and see what's going on, very involved, and I think they're ready. However, when we're in the depths of winter and some of those reduced contests, reduced opportunities are coming through, it's still going to be painful. But I think overall people are prepared. They understand the nature of the economy, they understand the nature of what's happened, what the legislature has, what they've done to public education, and so I think the parents understand.
Mark?
Well, I do believe the parents understand. I think they understand because, for example, in our community, we have a timber company that is just back to work, that has just added another shift on. Those parents are excited about being back to work, back to being employed so they can pay their bill and pay their taxes and to support their kids. And they're looking forward to a continuation of that employment, which triggers the thought of, well, if I can pay those things and do those things, well, what will my son or my daughter be doing this fall? Where will the volleyball games be? Where will the football games be? What can I schedule? They will occur, and I think Dr. Clark is quite correct. I think we have a more informed electorate this particular year because everyone is paying a closer attention to what was done with the funding dollar, whether at the local level or at the state level.
I can share for you, do you think the teachers know what they're going to see?
I believe that the teachers have a clear understanding of the economic downturn. I also believe that that we have many of our teachers who are, or most of our teachers, who are very frustrated, very concerned about how they are going to continue to do more with less. I think you think about it, and if you think of a teacher who is going to be a third-year teacher next year, and when they started in 08 and 09, they made $31,750, and then they came back for a second contract, and congratulations, your pay is cut to $30,915. And next year they look forward to another cut, and they'll be down to $29,655. That doesn't play out all across the state in those numbers, depending on how the districts pay. But it's sort of like, and tell me again why I spent 4 years in college so that I could start at one salary, get cut my second year, and get cut my third year.
Although we did get an email question from Walter who wants to know, other state employees have taken salary cuts or lost their jobs. Why not teachers?
Well, I think I said that teachers, and even though Mark said there were contentious bargaining sessions out there, there were in several places, and but I got to tell you that in 114 districts there were only a handful that things went south. Yeah. And so I don't believe that the teachers were asking for anything that they didn't think was fair and affordable.
And we've got a few people who are waiting on the phones. If we don't get to you while we're here on our live program, please hang with us and we'll get you when we go to our web extra after the fact. Let me try and get a call in from, let's see, I think I've got Wendell in Burley. Wendell?
Yes, Joan.
Go ahead.
This is to Mrs. Wood first. I have two questions. As far as you're concerned on teacher recruitment and the cuts teachers have had, how do we compare to our neighboring states? We have to look at Oregon and Washington and Montana, for instance, Utah. what's happening to the teachers there?
Okay. I afraid we're running out of time, so I'm going to just have to limit you to that one question. I'm sorry. Thanks, Wendell.
Well, I could tell you that in Wyoming, we lose teachers all the time to Wyoming because they have fared rather well in this economic downturn. They haven't had to make any cuts, and because of the resources that they have there, they have teachers starting at 40,000 and quickly making their way to 50,000. So we lose teachers there. We lose teachers to Washington. We lose teachers to Oregon. Not so much to Montana because we're probably closer as far as pay comparisons in Montana. I had legislators tell me, well, you don't want to go to Washington because they're taking cuts as well. Well, let's talk about apples to apples here. Washington started out a whole lot higher, so they'd have to take a lot of cuts to be able to be down to where we are.
We're rapidly running out of time, and I want to give each of you one last chance to get a comment, and I have to make them brief. Are we going to lose out on a quality education this next time when we start in the fall? Have we made the cuts to the point where quality is going to be in question?
I do not believe so. I have great confidence in our educators, in our system, and in their commitment to annual growth for every student. And they're going to give all they have. Administration's going to give all they have, and we're going to do the very best we can for students.
Okay. Jeffrey?
And you know, we have the finest educators in the nation. We have finest teachers, finest administrators, and the best school boards in the nation. And every one of those individuals are committed to quality and excellent education. I don't see we're going to see a reduction in the quality of education in this state.
And Mark, about 20 seconds.
I would concur with what Jeffrey just said, with the addition of, you know, the school boards are working very hard with the legislative people in Boise in order to provide additional solutions. We work collaboratively with the teachers and with the administrators to achieve that goal, and I think we'll see success in the near future.
Well, I believe that educators got into the business of working with kids because that's what they wanted to do. But you also have to remember that educators need to make a living. And so we have to pay our teachers to keep them here, and about as good as it gets.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate you joining me from around the state. If you have more questions about this, want to learn more about school cuts, go ahead to the Dialogue website at idahoptv.org. There you'll see our links and facts, more information, our web-only conversation, and we should have that survey up tomorrow on Friday so you can find out a bit more about what's happening in your home district. All that at idahoptv.org. You'll also find us on Facebook and YouTube. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web.